The components we've been using so far are all stateless presentational components. We used the function syntax to create these components. We call them stateless because we can't use the React state with these components. So if the component doesn't need state, this syntax is the way to go, just a simple function. But let's assume that this component is going to need some state. In fact, let's put it in practical terms. Let's say that this header is going to be the main header when I go to the main page, but then when I go to any naming contest, we're going to change this header to be the title of the contest, which means this header message is going to be dynamic based on where in the app we are right now. So this is an example of something that should be on the state of the component. So let's put the header message on the state of the app component. Of course, right now the app component is a stateless function component, so we need to convert it first into a class-based component. Sometimes you'll see examples React code that's using the create class syntax to create a stateful component, but we're not going to do that. We're going to go with the new syntax to extend react.component, just like that. So what we do to make the app component extends React component, we're going to make this into a class. This class extends React component. I'm going to cut the return code here. Inside the class, we define a render function, and this render function will return the markup that we had so far. So let's make sure this is working. And now the app component is using the other syntax, which allows us to introduce state on the component. So only use this syntax if you need to introduce state, or if you need the lifecycle methods of the component, which we're going to talk about in the next movie. If you don't need either state or lifecycle methods, just use the stateless function component syntax. So we're now ready to introduce a state. You'll see examples that are using a constructor to introduce the state, just like that. Here's a state object. For example, we would have a property on this object, and then we can use it anywhere here inside a variable. In this case, we can do this.state.test. And that would read the 42 value that we have on the state. However, since we configured stage 2, we can actually use a class property instead of having a constructor, just like this. And this would be equivalent to what we did before. Test. So this is a much shorter syntax, and we're going to go ahead and use it. Now what I want to put on the state is the header message. So let's call this page header, and this starts as naming contests, the current header. And now to read this here, instead of passing in a string, we're going to pass this .state.page header. Let's take a look. So now this string is coming from the component state, and we have control over it. In fact, take a look at the React DevTools. If you go into the app component, you'll see that there is a state section here, and it has the page header property. So let me show you how we can control the state. Whenever we're hovering over a component, we can access it in the console using $R. So I'm going to go to the console. I'm going to take a look at $R. This is the app component. In fact, we can read the state of the app component directly from here. We can also change the state using the setState method. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the state, and I'm going to replace the value for page header to something else. And once I hit enter, React is going to detect this change in the state, and it will re-render the DOM for us. So this is exactly what we'll eventually do when we change into a naming contest page and we have to change the header. What I want you to understand is all we need to do to change the content in the DOM is to change the state of our React component. And React is going to react when it sees the change in this state, and it will take the change to the DOM.